Hey, my name is ShawNshawN. I sell art on ShawNshawN.co and screen reads on ShawNshawNActing.com. Today we're going to review The Night House. So this is a film by David Bruckner. Time is an hour and 47 minutes, so right around the sweet spot, an hour and a half that I like. Very quickly paced. For a horror film, it doesn't feel quickly paced, so that's good. I think it's just because there's a little bit few characters in here, so you can really draw out those single character builds in this movie. You have Rebecca Hall as Beth, this recent widow, and Sarah Goldberg plays Claire, I think her friend. Vondie Curtis Hall plays Mell. Evan Jonigkeit plays Owen, the deceased husband of Beth. So it starts off right after the funeral. The widow is in her maybe mid-30s, I think. She was married to her husband very young, maybe in her early 20s. And he mysteriously shoots himself. She's just shocked to the core. You know, what happened? They thought they had an idyllic life. They were deeply in love. It's really disturbing. And she starts to drink heavily, obviously, after the funeral. And she drinks repeatedly every day, so she's getting, these profound funks, very deep depression. Slowly she starts to see kind of visions or these really vivid dreams. Her husband had a similar issue with sleepwalking when they were younger, so it's a little bit bizarre. She's wondering what's going on. How did this happen? The quirky thing is her husband had it right before he died and she never did. And then all of a sudden, as soon as he dies, she starts picking up these weird dreams and sleepwalking. So she's wondering, what is behind this? And she starts to wonder, is she just dreaming or is she seeing visions in the house? So it's a really interesting caper as she deep dives into her husband's past to figure out why he died, because she's just totally miserable. And she starts to uncover some really uncomfortable truths that she didn't know about her husband. So it's a very interesting kind of slow build mystery. So in the film, they're using kind of this grainy film. I think it's traditional film, but I think we've really gotten used to the 4K, 8K film on digital versus the traditional film. Or they've grained it up a little bit. I'm not sure either one. But, it gives it that kind of a little bit dreamy aspect, as if they shot it in the 70s or 80s or 90s even. But, in this case, it's, you still have cell phones and everything, so it's still modern. There's some really good jump scares in the plot. I really like them. You don't really see them coming at all. You're just a lot of scary, suspenseful buildups, and then all of a sudden, boom, you had the jump scares. It got me good, man. I was like, what? You always gotta love when they do it right, and sometimes they do it too much, and then you're like, oh, good, you can see them coming, or you know when to expect it. You're like, oh, it's somewhere in the scene. There's gonna be a jump scare, right? But this one, you just kind of like, what the hell's going on? All of a sudden, like, boom, these people come out of nowhere, and you're like, what the fuck is that? So that's really funny. Really what you want in kind of a horror, not horror, but kind of a suspense, thriller. And then, the wife doesn't know because she's drinking so heavily whether she's just having these diluted visions because of the drinking or not. And you're like, or is the drinking causing her to open up to a new world? Is the house really haunted with ghosts? And they really play back and forth between the shadows. It's like, oh, is that a figure? No, it's not a figure. And you go around here and, oh, that's just an average shape. It looks like a figure. So it's really kind of a cool optical illusion thing. They keep playing with that through the film until the act 3 at the very end. So that's a really nice feature, I think, of the film. And then you really don't know, there's this kind of quandary. Is the husband this really good person protecting the wife from some terrible demons? Or is it that the husband's been consumed with kind of this dark mystery and dark magic, and then he is the one that's really evil, and you're like, whatever the spirit is in the house is Owen trying to get back or something. So it's just this really odd thing of who Owen is. Another thing is earlier at some point she explains that she died early on in her youth. She kind of flipped a car. They got pancaked and crushed, which obviously you would be dead. And they said her lungs were crushed, and then she was out for 4 days, and then they brought her back. She says, well, I didn't see anything on the other side, so there's really nothing. So that's really interesting because they're playing with the whole thing of later in the movie, they're playing with ghosts kind of in a house, and then she doesn't believe in ghosts, so it's kind of like, what's going on? So it's kind of the agnostic look on life, that borderline where people are like, no, I'm smart, I'm not going to believe in this, and then you're like, yeah, but I'm seeing crazy things. What is that? Is it a dream? Is it the alcohol? So kind of really fun boundary there. And also the fact that she had this terrible accident in her youth, you might think, well, maybe she really died and this is just a whole dream. They don't suggest that, but it could be kind of a reality. They don't really go that route, but that could have been a possibility. It would be lazy script writing in a way if they did that, but you could kind of play with that a little bit. They might have played that a little more. There's this really nice, creepy, subtle music. Obviously, this type of film is very dependent on building up the jump scares and building up the scenarios, so you really have to have a really good creepy sets. And I didn't feel the house was super creepy, but it was creepy enough, like with glass doors that you could break into, obviously super easy. Glass windows out onto the lake, so anyone from the lake can see you, although it's on a lake, so no one's going to really see you there. But then if there's someone spying from the other side of the line with like maybe a telescope, they could be watching you. And so it has kind of these creepy elements and the isolation of being in the middle of nowhere. I've been to a house similar to this on a lake where there's literally no one there but one house in the lake, and you're just like, what in the hell is this, right? You just feel like Jason's going to come out of the swamp and kill you or something, right? If you grew up in the city, all just like, the lack of noise just becomes disturbing. Whereas if you go to the country, this is very comforting. You're like, oh, this is a nice idyllic sign. I want to see the farmland and all that. But if you grow up in the city, it's just disturbing, the silence, right? So it's very interesting. And I had that, because I lived recently in the farmland, but I've been in the city for a while now. So now I get kind of that creepy feel of, the country's, possessed, and could be some dangerous stuff in the country. You never know. And then you have this idea in the book, she finds this mysterious book of her husband's plans for the house, and he had built the whole house himself, which she found strange because he's an architect, but she could just hire people, right, to kind of subcontract it out. But he's like, no, I'm going to build it all. She's like, all right, well, she wants to build a house, and she doesn't really want to sell the house because it's her husband's own design. But then she finds plans for like a reverse plan house, and she's like, what is this, So there's this weird thing where he's building a second house, supposedly, or at least he had sketches for it, and you're like, what is this? And she has a dream of the second house, and in the second house, she's like looking inward, and there's all these women in the house. She's like, what is this about? And it just becomes more and more disturbing, these dreams, and just gets darker and darker. You're like, who are these women? Are they real women? And, it starts to seem like maybe they are real women, so it's just kind of very strange of the origin of the second house and what it's used for. And it gets back to that thing, the notion whether she's living in a dream since she died when she was younger, or is it just a recent kind of event with the funeral, and then she's just having these drinking episodes. So you have kind of that disconnect between the two time frames, I think. It's not very obvious. They could have played a little bit more there, I think, to make that even creepier. Like, I think if they'd shown a little bit of scene of her original death in her 20s going off a cliff, it would have been, it would have added 50, 60,000 to the budget, driving an old car off a cliff, right? But they could have really used that maybe in the middle of the film to show different sequences of that, and then you could have played that back instead of talking about it, just actually show it. It's always better in film, usually, if you show it versus you tell it. But it does keep a tighter plot if you just tell parts of the story. I think you can go either way, but that kind of would have been nice to see as well. Could have done some creepy stuff there as well. But obviously, if you don't show and you tell it, then you imagine it, what could have happened, right? Another part in the story is like when she goes into the second house, she starts seeing these other women. So you're like, are these women Owen's other wives? If she's in a dream and they're the reality? So that's kind of a really fun dual world, kind of similar to the effect that you had in Us. I think in Us it was much more impactful and more darker. You're just like, what the hell is, in Us it just gets really disturbing at the end because you realize there's been a flip. And in this case, you're wondering a little bit like that, but not as deeply disturbing as Us. But I think they got kind of a little bit of a glimpse of the Us kind of brought into this film, which is really nice. I was a little bit surprised in the end when she kind of finds out about her husband's past, which is terrible. Why she doesn't just kill herself at the end. Maybe that was maybe that was one of the alternate endings, and they decided, well, that's too grisly, people aren't going to like it, so let's switch to she survives. That's kind of a thing. If you have an actual real tragedy, then people don't like it. So your ticket sales go down. So people make it like, oh, here's the ending. No, we'll change it to a happy ending. We'll sell more tickets, But I kind of liked that idea. But it was kind of shows her willpower. She still has a little bit of grip in reality versus Owen obviously lost himself completely to this weird demons or something that were in the house. And then the weird part too, she's uncovered that there's this second house, and first she thinks it's a dream, and then she actually uncovers this shack that's kind of built on the other side of the lake, and she's like, what is this about? It's totally dilapidated, and then it comes out that he was proud of it for some reason. You're like, it doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of like really interesting, the possibilities of what happened in that house. Her neighbor, she kind of uncovers it slowly. This kind of grandfatherly black guy in the neighborhood, he tells her like, no, I didn't want to tell you because he's dead. Why bring up bad spirits of your husband? Just remember the fond memory. And that's kind of what people do when people die. They just kind of idealize their life. This happened with One of my great aunts, her husband died, and it was terrible. He had 2 separate families besides her. He beat her. He didn't put a fence up on the property, which was right next to the Yellowstone River. And one of his kids drowned in the river, and he just beat his kids. And he generally wasn't a good guy, right? And then at the end of his life, after he died, she put together this film, and it was like all these wonderful memories of him. And you're like, what are you talking about? You know, my dad was just so shocked, like, what is this crap, you know? So it's really interesting how people want to idealize their loved ones when they die and pass away. So you have this kind of distortion of reality that happens in this film, but it's actually a distortion the other way where, you know, people are like, hey, just remember her fondly, don't look too deeply in the past. And as she dies in the past, it gets more and more disturbing, right? Of course, you know, in this type of film. So that's kind of an interesting take on, you know, this mystery house and all that. I think they did a pretty good job. I think it's maybe a 1 or 2 watch film. I don't think it's more deeper than that, but I think they did a pretty good job. I'd recommend it for, you know, a good 1 watch film in the cinema. These films are the best in the cinema, I think. And if you'd like to subscribe, you can subscribe below. And I'll see you in the next movie review. Thanks for watching, guys.